talking about listening to God and our series on listening. And I've begun to ask myself a question, Lord, how long are we going to talk about listening? And he said, when you finally start listening. And so tonight we're going to look at a little bit of what God has for us through the life of Moses. And we're going to look at Moses and different moments of listening over the next few weeks, and what God was saying to him and how he responded to that. And so tonight we're going to begin in Exodus chapter 3. For those that are watching online, Exodus chapter 3, beginning at verse number 1. It says, Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush, and Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, while the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, he said. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way of the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. And may the Lord bless the reading of his word today. There are times in life, and especially in our country, when about every 4 years you don't believe what you're told. About every 4 years we don't believe what we're told. Regardless of which side of the aisle that you hear it from, you just don't believe it. And there are other places that we don't believe what we're told either. And one of those places tends to be when people go to buy a car. You just don't quite know whether or not to believe what they tell you. I mean, when you go there, you know, hopefully you can do your research. Hopefully you can look at whatever vehicle that you're thinking about purchasing, and you can do your homework ahead of time so that you can speak at least somewhat intelligently about it. But have you ever noticed any time that you go there, and if the salesman is good, if he's good, he'll talk to you about what you want and what you've come in there for. But then he'll always, or she will, mention something a little bit different. Something just a little bit, I mean, have you ever noticed in the showroom, there's never a base model in there? There's never a base model. I mean, it is always something that is absolutely loaded to the gills. And they have something there that is absolutely amazing. But you're standing there and you're shopping for that new set of wheels, and suddenly they show you this 2021 Belchfire 290 ZQX. I mean, this thing will absolutely just run circles around everything else. And it comes completely loaded with, as soon as you sit down, it has an automatic sanitizer, which is COVID-19. It will clear everything you've ever been around. It will absolutely take care of you and your family. And not only that, when you begin to look at it and you see how fast this thing will go, the performance on the road, there is nothing that can keep up with the electronically sanitized inverse mounted differential adjusted automatically to support the gears and the ratios. All of those fit together. If you all remember the TV show. Okay? If they're good, that's what they say to us. If they're good, they begin to try to pull you a little different direction. And then you begin to ask yourself, do I really, truly need a structurally focused, distributed, ergonomically corrected armature for my vehicle? Do I need all of those pieces? Now, what did you just hear? Heard a whole lot of words. You heard a whole lot of words about a mythical vehicle that does not, I hate to tell you, but there is not a 2020 Belchfire 290 ZXQ that I'm aware of. But notice how we can take something extremely simple and make it complicated. Purchasing a vehicle to get you and your family from point A to point B. We can make that extremely complicated if we choose to. We can get to the place to where whatever we look at, we can make it so complicated that it is no longer straightforward. What we should be able to make a decision on suddenly is totally held in question of how on earth do I figure out what I need to do. Sometimes when it comes to hearing God, we can get all caught up in so many of those processes that we allow what God is doing to become extremely complex. Extremely complex. When God looks at us and says, what I want to say to you is simple. What I really have to say to you is extremely simple. But when we go from a simple understanding to something even super complex, it brings us to the places where you can fill some notes in tonight. We no longer, when we go from the simple to the complex, we no longer trust what we hear. We no longer trust what we hear. And a lot of times we no longer trust what we feel. And then we also no longer trust ourselves. Because there have been times when people have tried to listen to God and we've made Him so complicated that we don't trust what we hear from Him. There are times that we have made Him so complicated that we get to the place to where, well, is that really what He's saying to me? Is that really what He's talking to me about? Is that really what He has for me? And sometimes we get to the place that we don't know what to listen to. Others will say, you know, when I read the Bible, I believe what I see and what I read and what God speaks to me, and I can trust what God is sharing with me there. But you have to be careful at times because you can get into the hermeneutics of it and you can get into some of the critical analysis of Scripture, and you can get to the place to where there are times when the redactive criticism and the post-exilic prophets and the paradigm shifts and some of the things that you will learn about that, you get to the place to where you even doubt sometimes what the Word of God has to say. And you have to be careful with that. You have to be very careful with that. Because then you begin to doubt, well, is God even speaking to me in this particular way? And then I ask myself, can I trust what I hear? Can I trust what I hear God saying to me? And then others focus on prayer. Prayer is a way to hear the voice of God. Prayer is a good way to listen to what God has for me, but can I deceive myself? Can I listen to myself and hear God talk to me to a point to where I can make things up of what God's saying? Sure you can. Sure you can. You can convince yourself that right is wrong. In 30 years of pastoring this congregation, there are some people who have absolutely convinced themselves that right is wrong and wrong is right. They have. I've seen it. And I wish it was only one time, but I've seen it time and time and time again. We also can say we're going to pray about something and don't. Have you ever done that before? I'm going to pray about it. It's like the old pastor friend of mine that he talked about, that God was leading him to maybe exit the congregation where he was and go to a new congregation. And he had a conference call with them and said that, he would pray about it. As soon as the call was over, his wife went upstairs and he heard all kinds of noise going on up there. And he went up to see what was going on. And she said, "You pray, I'm packing." We can get to the place to where we put words in God's mouth. We can get to the place to where we put the things in God's mouth. And even in prayer, we can allow selfishness to take over. Here's my question for you. When it comes to listening to God, when it comes to listening to God and who He is and what He has for us, what can you trust as God's authentic voice? What can you trust as God's authentic voice? Because God's voice is speaking every day. God is talking to us every day. He is speaking. He is giving us opportunity. He is opening up avenues for us to be able to serve Him and love people, maybe in ways that we never even thought about. And God opens some things up for us. You see, that's when we have to make sure that it's what He has. And my premise tonight that I want us to really look at and zero in on is that sometimes to hear God's authentic voice, you have to listen to your own heart. You have to listen to your own heart. And by listening to your own heart, some unique things happen. And sometimes when you listen to your own heart, you can actually hear the voice of God. That's why anytime someone is wrestling with things, my first question is, where's your heart? And it's not that I'm doubting their salvation or anything along those lines. I want to know where your heart is, because when we know where our heart is, that's the very best opportunity for us to get to hear God. Moses was that way. Moses had an opportunity to hear God's heart. I shared with you a couple weeks ago about the movie Moses and how they began to figure out what the voice of God would sound like, and they actually used the actor's own voice because that's how they said, we hear God that way. Normally it's through our voice. It's not some booming voice, but it's that way. And when it comes to listening, Moses wanted to listen to God, hear God, but he had to hear it through his own heart. Moses was tending the sheep out in a barren wilderness. Now, it wasn't all desert. There were some plants and things around, or else he couldn't tend sheep there if there wasn't something for them to eat. But Moses came along and he began to work there. I mean, Moses had everything in place. You know, Moses had a wonderful experience with the living God in that place. And when he had that experience with the living God there, Moses was able to live life with confidence. That's something about hearing the voice of God. When you hear the voice of God through your heart, it creates a confidence that you may not have until you hear that voice. It creates a confidence. It creates a trust. It creates something that clears the way for all of us to be able to get to the spot where we can see God doing some amazing things. Moses heard and he trusted the voice of God. Now, how did this happen? How did this happen in Moses' life? Because Moses was a human being just like all of us. And a lot of times when we're trying to figure out what God has for us and what God is going to be doing in our lives and around us, sometimes when we hear what He's done for somebody else, it helps. Sometimes it helps. And so I want to point out to you the little phrase when Moses was talking to God and God was talking to him. Moses really didn't know what to call him. And God said simply, I am. I am is not complicated. It's not hard to understand. It's not hard for anyone to really grasp a hold of. But he said, I am. I am. And 2 times when God speaks to Moses, I am, the phrase is there. And you see, when Moses understood God as I am. I am. It's not, I could be, I thought I was. I am. There is I'm looking for the right word. There is a confidence that comes when you understand I am. I'll never forget a few years ago on one of our state levels, there was a question about some of the financial statements, and someone was saying that we needed to see a little bit more of the financial statements, and some of what they were asking was not unreasonable, but the person who was saying it said it in a way that it was a little insulting to the state treasurer. And the person who said it looked up and he said, well, I'm not a CPA. And the person that he was attacking said from the microphone where they were, I am. And I'm going to tell you something. The whole conversation changed. Because while this person was not a CPA, he was making CPA-like inquiry and casting doubt. But when the treasurer said, I am, the conversation stopped. The questioning stopped. And it has not resumed since that moment. When we get to the place that we come face to face with I am, things change. You see, Moses, his life had changed a whole lot. I mean, he grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. He messed up and he killed somebody. Then he escaped, went over into Midian, met a little girl there, fell in love, got married. It was all good for a long time. He was out tending his father-in-law's sheep. He was a part of the family business. His life had settled in. Everything was exactly the way that he wanted it until one day God intervened. And Moses is out there in that wilderness, and he gets, on that fateful afternoon, the opportunity to have an extraordinary experience with God. And that extraordinary experience was he saw a bush on fire, but it didn't burn up. I don't know about you, but I think that would get my attention as well. I mean, we've got folks out in California right now where there's so many fires going on, that I'll guarantee you out there when the fires hit, it's consuming things, from homes to forests, etc. This one didn't. This was one that was different, and so because he lived in a wilderness area, much like California, he knew if a fire got started, it could destroy all of the pasture land. It could destroy everything, and so he had to figure out how to maybe put it out. So he walked over there, and it spoke to him. Now, I don't know about you, but if a bush spoke to me, I would pay attention. I would look around. I would ask questions. I would try to find who is talking somewhere. And Moses did all of that, I'm sure. Yet when he got to the place to where God said, I'm here, I am. And he said, kick off your shoes because where you're standing is holy ground. Kick off your shoes. In other words, when we come into the very presence of God, our very posture changes. When we come face to face with God, our very posture changes. And the language here is really, it's really amazing, I think, because Moses, then when God called his name, notice what Moses did. Here I am. Here I am. When Moses heard God's voice talk to him, he said, here I am. And we see this dialogue and this discussion back and forth between Moses and God, and Moses listening to what God had for him. And, you know, I guess when Moses said, here I am, that was a very vulnerable moment because he was saying, I'm available. Talk to me. I'm available. Talk to me. I think one of the struggles we have in the 21st century in listening and hearing God is our availability for Him. Say, here I am. Here I am. Our availability. And sometimes we hedge on things. Sometimes we pull things back and, you know, God, you know I've got all of this responsibility. You know all of the things that I have. And God says, really? I'm surprised by that. No, God says, I know all of that. But He wants to know if we will listen and hear what He has for us. Sometimes we don't hear God talking to us because we don't listen with our hearts like we should. We don't listen with our hearts the way that we should because we listen more with our heads. I've known some people who have walked with God so long that it's to the point where He doesn't move their heart anymore. It's all up here. It's all up here. And that's a sad place to be, my friends. I had a couple professors that it was all up here. They'd gotten to the place to where they didn't have the heart experience, the heart change. They didn't have the pliability of their heart for God to be able to use them because they had gotten to the point to where all they wanted to do was think about Him and not experience Him with their heart. And so as the church, we have to make sure that we don't fall into that same thing. I mean, there are times when we try to have every question answered, every I dotted, every T crossed. We want all of those things. Before God can even speak to us, we want to know where the end game is going to be. And we do. Let's just be honest. We do. Yet when God says, I want to talk to your heart, sometimes you got to trust Him for the end game and not know how you're going to get there. And it's in that getting there, it's in that process, it's in those moments when we say to God, here I am. Here I am. When the great I am says, here I am. When we say that to Him, amazing things happen. Because here's what it is. Number one, we simply are to be available and to be open. Simply to be available and open. To be ready for whatever God might share, for what He might do. And some of the saddest people Some of the saddest people that I've ever met in my life are those who are not willing to let God do something different and new in their hearts. We used to call them saved and satisfied. Maybe you've known somebody like that. But it's in that availability and that pliability of our hearts where God really comes along. When we say, "Here I am," it's at that moment that the great I am can do something amazing in your heart. When I'm willing to say, "Here I am." When I'm willing to say, "God, I'm not really sure everything that you have, but here we go." And what he was asking Moses was not a simple task. Because Moses, I don't know if there was a statute of limitations on murder in Egypt. I know there's not one in the United States. I don't know what it was back then. Maybe all of those that knew what had happened, they were gone, etc. But Moses knew. Moses knew. And when he began to question that, because through his mind, all that stuff happened, all that stuff running through there, and then God looks at him and says, "I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Why on earth would he do that? Why would God come along and say, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob"? The reason that he did that was to let Moses know, this is not my first rodeo. This is not God's first rodeo. This is not the first time he has ever been down this road. And I know in our culture today, we think we're the only people to ever do this. And if I hear the word on media one more time, unprecedented. Okay? I mean, they run that word through there are all kinds of words that are getting run into the ground now, like pivot. Have you heard pivot recently? I mean, there are all kinds of words that they use, but unprecedented literally means it has never happened before, ever. Can I tell you a secret? We are not that unique. We are not that unique. We may have more technology than generations before us, but in most ways we're just like the generations before us. And a lot of what we're told is unprecedented has been preceded multiple times in multiple millennia and centuries. They've all gone through this. But when we're dealing with our heart, because it is so personal, we begin to think this has never happened to anybody else. And part of our problem in listening to ourselves is that we get the idea nobody has ever before felt the way that I feel. Nobody has ever felt what I've felt. Nobody understands me. Nobody else has ever gone through what I feel. And when we are going through a difficult struggle and working with our own heart, because it hurts and it's difficult, we get the idea that nobody's ever done this before. And that's why God looked at Moses and said, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." I've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. So when we walk through the things that we walk through, and God really wants to work down deep inside of our hearts, understand, Moses, I've been here before. What you're facing, I've faced with somebody else. Do you think this is the first time in human history that they've questioned on how to open school? It's not. It's not. They've had to walk through these things before. Go back 100 years to the Spanish flu, and you see many of the things that they questioned and they walked through and how they figured it out and the process. And guess what? We're all here, so they all survived. It's not God's first rodeo with us. So whatever you are going through at this moment, understand God wants you to know, number two, that I am the God of your fathers. Those that have gone before, He wants us to understand that that is who He is. One of the best ways to share your faith story is to tell stories. One of the best ways to express what God can do in the lives of people is to tell the story. Because we love stories. If I come in here and we begin this time together with once upon a time, we all know what that leads to. We all know that that leads to a story. And this is exactly what God said to Moses, is I have something to share with you. There is something amazing. I want you to know I have been here before. And when we can look at the life of a biblical character and we see what God did inside of them and how God took them from maybe a familiar spot to something new, just like he did Moses. I mean, Moses was ready to hang in there until he got his pension. He just was. I mean, he had it made. And God said, come on, old man, I got something for you. I got something for you. Come on. I've got something different. I've got something new. And then to let him know that as God has always acted in the lives of others, and he's acted in the lives of different people, and it filters through all the different personalities of the people all around us, the personalities that have spoken to us and in our lives and the stories that we've heard and all of that, then God comes along and says, I am. I am. In other words, just like I was with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I am was with them, and I am with you. And today for us, I am walks with us. And he speaks to us, and he holds on to us. So how did Moses hear from his heart? How did that happen? Because Moses did what all of us do. That's the third thing here is, who am I? Who am I? There's an old song. It says, who am I that a king would live and die for? Who am I? And Moses knew who he was. Moses knew what he had done. Moses knew he was on all of that, and he said, who am I? Yet I want you to know, authentic listening always involves our responsibility. Because at some point, we have to get to the place that we allow what God is trying to say to us to find a lodging place down inside our hearts. Because when it's all said and done, I'll guarantee you when Moses went to Pharaoh, he didn't want to go. I believe that Moses was afraid. I believe that Moses didn't want to go and run the risk of bad things happening to him. Yet, when he said, if I go, what will they say? If I say, your God sends me. And the same confidence that God gave to Moses' heart, he gave to the people's heart when he said, tell them I am has sent you. In other words, the same confidence that I will be with you, let them know I will be with them. Because I am. I am. The Lord will not only speak to our hearts as far as who he is, what he is. He also speaks to our hearts to the place to where we can hear his heart. If you want to know God's heart, open yours to Him. If you want to know God's heart, open yours to Him. If you want to understand who He is, open your heart to Him and ask Him, who am I? He'll tell you who you are in His eyes. If you ask Him, who am I? He will show you who you are in His eyes. If you get to the place to where you begin to wonder and question, ask Him those hard questions. He can handle your questions. Last few days, we've had a little guy in the life of the church. His mom and dad have brought him over, and he learned how to ride a bike in the last couple days, right out here in the parking lot. And it is so cool to watch that happen. It is so cool to watch that, and he's getting kind of brave now. We'll see when the first wreck happens, because you know that'll happen at some point. But he's really good at it right now. But I watched today as his parents were just making sure he was okay. Just watching, making sure. Can I tell you a secret about God? He's watching. He's making sure that you're okay. And He wants all of us to know that while it feels unprecedented to us, it's not. And He wants us to know. And you could put names of godly, saintly people in that spot where He said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You could put godly people that you have known in your life in those spots as well. Because you know those stories. You know what God has done with that. You know how their hearts were touched, how their hearts were changed. I submit to you this evening that nothing is as empowering as a conscious understanding of the living God moving and working inside of your heart. There is nothing on this planet that is as empowering to have a living, conscious presence and understanding of a bold and a vibrant experience with God. There is nothing that will give you more confidence than that. There are all kinds of things that will take your confidence, but nothing will give you more confidence than that. Because God comes along and He says, I am. I am. So as we are continuing to listen, and we're looking at the life of Moses, listen to your heart. Allow the heart of God to talk to your heart. Let Him know you're available. Let Him know you're expecting something. You're expecting Him to do something. Let Him know that I'm available and I expect you to begin to do something. Listen to the heartbeat of the world. To see the needs around us. To see the needs of people that are all around us. I did a little study last week. It was not a scientific study, but I did one last week. Because I told Lori when the lockdown hit back in March, I said, this lockdown is going to do something to the mental health of this nation. I understand why we did it. I understand the value of it and the need for it, but it's going to do something. Last week, I know we've had a few more fatalities for COVID-19, but last week in the state of West Virginia, there were 160 COVID-19 attributed deaths, and that's 160 too many, all right? Don't misunderstand me with that. It's 160 too many. But I looked to see on the state website how many suicides there have been in the state of West Virginia in the same amount of time. Do you realize that there were almost 500 suicides in the state of West Virginia in the same time period? You've not heard the first news report on that. Not the first one. Here's what I want you to know. When you've got Jesus Christ in here, we can get through unprecedented times. When you have Jesus Christ in here, we can make changes. We can see so many things happening. Why? Because he says to you and he says to me, I am. I am listening. I am available. I am here to walk with you. And I am here to be authentic with you. God will always be authentic with us. And because of that, we can have a confidence and a strength that we wouldn't normally have in and of ourselves, because we can trust him even when the I's aren't dotted, even when the T's aren't crossed. We can trust him because he's walked this road before. When we listen, like Moses did, it's amazing what you hear. And it's amazing how it changes us. Amen? Amen. Justin, would you come and share our prayer requests?